A recent article in the New York Times tracks how the city of Houston, America's fourth largest city, managed to cut homelessness by an astounding 63% over the last decade. The city has moved more than 25,000 homeless people directly into apartments and houses, and the overwhelming majority of them have remained housed after 2 years. Now, according to the Times, Houston has gotten this far by teaming with county agencies and persuading scores of local service providers, corporations, charitable nonprofits to work in unison. The leader of one of those nonprofits joins us now. Mike Nichols is president and CEO of Coalition for the Homeless. Mike, welcome to Rising.
Ryan, thanks for having me. Deeply appreciative.
Sure. So Mike, how did this come together? What was homeless policy, before this kind of new approach in Houston?
In 2011, HUD notified the Houston environs that we were a problem because we had so many homeless people. At that time, the mayor at that time, Anise Parker, along with leaders in the nonprofit and business world, got together and said, we need to solve this problem. What came to be was a continuum of care. Part of that came out of the Obama administration when they established the HEART Act, which is an act that said communities need to, when they ask for money from HUD, do it in a community way. So continuum of care was established. That continuum of care chose the Coalition for the Homeless as its lead agency. The lead agency acts as the conductor for more than 100 different nonprofits and government entities. With that establishment, a decision was made to focus on permanent supportive housing. That's a three-leg approach to housing a homeless person. To count them as housed, they have to have a real unit, an apartment with a key and a lock and air conditioning and heating and a refrigerator and stove. They have to have payment through usually a voucher, federal voucher for that apartment. And they have to have services which are also fully funded, not volunteer services, but fully funded, usually provided by a nonprofit. With that intention, with that focus, with the collaboration between government, nonprofits, business community, philanthropy, 25,000 people were housed in the supportive housing with an outstanding result of 85% of those people remaining in housing. This is a system that all communities can use, and we are glad to have people come and see what we are doing. Houston should not be unique.
Yeah, has it been a matter of kind of centralizing services or streamlining services and making the programs work better for people in Houston, like bringing it all into a better system?
So the LA Times said, here's what LA could learn from Houston. They said it's three things. It is organization, pragmatism, scale. Organization is that there is an entity. I really like our system that we have a nonprofit as the lead agencies. Many folks use city and county government as the lead agency, but a nonprofit can bring together the business community, philanthropy, city government, county government, other cities, metro, other entities into our system. Secondly, it is voluntary that the nonprofits choose a path, but over time, the nonprofits have tried to stop stepping on each other's toes and choose a path so they could have an expertise. One of our great partners used to do everything for the homeless, from feeding them to jobs to other things. Now they are focused on case management and outreach, two things that they do well and can support the system. But again, we use all sort of entities, not just secular nonprofits, but faith-based communities to do their work. And we work with them, both those that are funded through the coalition and the continuum of care and non-funded. We work as partners to solve this problem of homelessness, and this collaboration has been key.
And what about pragmatism, number two? How does that play in?
All right, so this is difficult. The decision was made in 2011, two things. One is we would have coordinated access. When a homeless person comes into the system, they would be assessed and given a score, a vulnerability score. With that score, they then go to what part of the list. In the old days, before 2011, it depended which group you walked into. If you walked into Salvation Army, Star of Hope, Search, that would depend when you would get housing. This vulnerability scale says the people who are most likely to die on the streets, they get first choice. Now, this was controversial because many people say, oh, we ought to give first choice to those people who are most likely to succeed. But Houston made the decision that was fiscally and morally responsible to focus on the most vulnerable. And the pleasant surprise, the excitement, is those people have succeeded at 85% rate. Not 100%, but a very successful 85% rate. So that's one, is this coordinated access. The second is the focus on supportive housing. Our continuum, our funding stream, do not pay for emergency shelters like many cities. Emergency shelters are a big part of our partnership, but they are privately funded. So as much money as possible goes to putting vulnerable homeless people into permanent supportive housing. That's the goal, that's the focus, that's the pragmatism.
So in Washington, D.C., where Ryan and I are based, synthetic opioids like fentanyl are ravaging the city and particularly hitting the homeless community very hard. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about the effects of fentanyl in Houston, and then how you're able to have that 85% number, by treating mental health and addiction as well. What part of the equation is that?
Our organization and our focus is on supportive housing. So we do partner with wonderful organizations, particularly the Harris Center, which is our mental health and IDD authority. They've been terrific partners. The Sobering Center, terrific partners. But the philosophy, and this is unique, but our data shows it's correct. The philosophy is get someone housing, and then they will begin to solve their substance issues or their mental health issues. The housing is the first and most important step. And without it, you can spend a lot of money, and not help people move forward. So our philosophy is focus on the housing, give them the services that they need to beat their drug addiction and their issues. But first, get them off the street. First, get them out of the unsheltered areas.
In most neighborhoods, when you try to create supportive housing for a homeless population, you're going to have the neighbors in that neighborhood say, no, not in my backyard, the very famous NIMBYs. How have you been able to kind of maneuver through or around the NIMBY problem?
Of the 8,000 people who are currently in permanent housing in Houston through our programs, again with services, et cetera, about 6,800 of those are in what we call scattered sites. Those are just apartment developments, and they can be from 1 to 2 to 20. Sometimes we get more. We'd like to keep it around 30 or 40 people are living in each entity. And what happens is they're able to be integrated in the community. I think it's very important. Landlords are an essential part of our system, an essential part of our progress, working with those landlords, making sure they know that the services that are provided to these clients. I think that's a very successful way, and I wish there were more laws and funding that would encourage landlords, even in affordable housing, to take 20 or 30% of those units and give them, or lease them, not give them, lease them to formerly homeless people. But that's how we work. We have a landlord engagement team that focuses on these individual landlords to put folks in scattered sites, and that's been very successful.
Now, I'm wondering, you mentioned the Los Angeles Times op-ed. Have you guys had many people from other cities knocking on your doors in Houston and trying to figure out how they can replicate your model elsewhere?
We've seen people from Spokane, from Anchorage, from many other cities during my tenure of the last 3 years. Obviously, with an article like this, more folks are looking at us. I am hoping, and I've asked our congressman to give me a chance to speak to HUD Secretary Fudge to let them see what we're doing directly, and tell her about some of the opportunities that HUD could have to improve their system in housing people. We were excited to hear the news of additional funding yesterday, but again, I certainly look forward to HUD and other agencies finding a way to help those who are living unsheltered. But the communities
so
all over
needed.
are coming to see us, yes.
How far do you still have to go? You've made a huge dent, 60+%. But what's the remaining population that you still have to house?
So once a year, HUD requires us to do what's called a point in time count. That was done in January, early February, and about 4,000 people were either living unsheltered or in emergency shelters. Our goal is to end what we call chronic homelessness. That is a technical term that means that if someone is chronically homeless, been disabled, homeless for more than a year, we can find them housing in 30 days. That's our goal. A lot depends on how fast we get there based on how many landlords will work with us and the continuation of funding. But we're optimistic about meeting that goal in the next 2 years or so. We're optimistic about ending that technical goal. We ended veterans homelessness, again, a technical term, a couple of years ago. And so if a veteran shows up in our system, that person can get housed within 30 days.
Great.
One more quick question, actually, is just how Houston's dealt with encampments, because the New York Times article actually starts with that, and that's an issue that's been really difficult for Washington, D.C., for New York, for cities all over the country. Those encampments, what is the policy in Houston, policing, and just in terms of whether people are allowed to camp in public?
So we've had a really great collaboration with the city, because we're not the city, we're not the county. We've had great collaboration with the city and the police. And our system is that we will go into an encampment and we will offer housing to people in the encampment. And if we can offer immediate housing, which we've done through some of our programs, particularly our COVID housing program, we can offer immediate housing to those people. Most every one of them will say, yes, we're coming with you to go to an apartment. Once the individuals are housed, then the police, the county, the city, the cleanup crews, Texas Department of Transportation will come in and close off those areas because those people have been housed. So our role is housing the folks in supportive housing and working constructively with the city and county to be our follow-up. We're not in charge of closing the encampments. One of the things I want to make sure that the listeners understand is politically closing the encampments is something that's important. But morally, what's important is housing the unsheltered. That's the focus. And that's what I hope everybody will begin focusing on. I'm sad to learn that some cities have closed encampments and now have homeless people living in the woods where outreach workers are afraid to go, where people are hard to find. We in Houston, that we saw that happening before 2011, and we learned well that the right thing to do is put people in housing. And I want to say one other thing. It's fiscally appropriate to house people. It cost us about $18,000 in federal dollars, all federal dollars, to house an individual for 1 year in supportive housing. Please compare that to an estimate when we had a wide range of estimates, but my estimate is about $50,000 per year for a person living unsheltered or in a emergency shelter because of emergency health care, because of policing, because of cleanup. It's just fiscally responsible, and I'm always saddened to see certain groups of with so-called conservatives oppose what we're doing and not seeing the fiscal responsibility. It cost about $35,000 to keep a person in Harris County Jail. And the 10,000 people in Harris County Jail, 5,000 said they have mental health or substance issues. Right. 3,000 self-identify as homelessness.
Yeah,
and that's if it's fiscally responsible to put people in the housing.
Yeah, it's a great example of what is it, penny wise and pound foolish. But we have to leave it there. But thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And yes, we're welcome to see folks from Washington, D.C. or elsewhere to tell them our story and the hurdles we have to face.
Well, if you're ever up here, come by the studio. Love to have you in. Meanwhile, stick around. We'll have more Rising right after this.